Welcome to In the Fire, a podcast for the young families of Chapelgate Presbyterian Church. Marriage and parenting are a wonderful blessing and are extremely rewarding, but they're also really hard and can leave us feeling exhausted, overwhelmed, and defeated. That's exactly why we started this podcast, to help families see how the gospel injects encouragement, comfort, and hope into the daily grind of our lives, and to remind you that you're never alone in the struggle. There is another in the fire.
Hello and welcome to In the Fire. My name is Rob Gicking and I'm the host of this podcast. It's a brand new podcast for the people of Chapelgate, specifically for our young families. And so I thought to myself, we could just jump straight into some content, but maybe it would be helpful just to lay down a little bit of groundwork for how we came to the idea of a podcast in the first place, kind of what this podcast is going to be about and what its purpose is. And so before we dive really too much into it, I wanted to just take a moment and kind of do this little bonus episode at the beginning to let you guys know what this is and how we got here. And so the first thing I would say is I want to explain the name of the podcast to you. You know, we're calling this In the Fire, and in some ways it's a little dramatic, right? I mean, you want a title that's, gonna grab people's attention, but there's actually a really neat kind of backstory for it that I wanted to share with you guys. And some of you may have already guessed. It comes from Daniel 3, right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are told to bow down to Nebuchadnezzar's statue, and they refuse. And when they refuse, he gets mad, and he kind of has a toddler temper tantrum. And instead of just screaming and like throwing stuff, he throws them into the fire. And so all three of them are dropped into the fiery furnace, right? And then it says Nebuchadnezzar is amazed, and he turns to his advisors. He says, "Did we not throw three men into the fire? Why is there now a fourth?" And the idea here being that this is a Christophany, that Jesus Christ has appeared in the flesh here in the Old Testament in Daniel 3 as a savior, a provider for these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so it's a reminder, it's a physical image of the fact that in these moments in life, in the intense trials, in the difficult moments, when marriage seems like it's falling apart, when children seem like they are not listening or obeying at all, those moments, right? I mean, even those kind of mundane moments of just like you're exhausted at the end of a long day of caring for somebody else, and you just don't know how you're going to get up and do it again tomorrow. Here's the truth. Those are fires. Those are times in our life that are really, really difficult, and whether they are the kind of difficulties that we feel comfortable sharing with other people, the common difficulties, or those that are really kind of unique to us and maybe take a little more discretion. The truth is this: Jesus is in each of those fires with us. There is another in the fire with us. And that's one of those core principles of Christianity that I think really injects a lot of hope into our day-to-day lives. And I wanted to name our podcast something that really captures that spirit well, especially because the reality is this: being a young family is hard. You're going through a whole lot of changes, whether it's the first, couple years of marriage and you're going from living for yourself to now living for somebody else who did not have the same childhood upbringing as you, maybe doesn't look at money the same way as you, maybe has different cleanliness standards than you do. I'm looking at myself here. But yeah, I mean, it's like whether it's marriage or it's learning how to raise children, and going from sleepless nights to I heard this great, it was new to me. I'm sure you guys are going to laugh, but I never heard three-nager. I heard terrible twos, but three-nager was new to me. And it just gave me a whole new, very accurate understanding of the phase of life we're in as parents. And I'll tell you, it's spot on. So it doesn't matter where you are. Maybe you've got elementary school kids, but here's the reality. It's difficult to be a parent. It's difficult to be a husband or a mom. And that's a fire of its own sake. And guess what? Jesus is right there with you. So that's the name of our podcast, In the Fire, that we would always be reminded of the fact that God is with us in the struggle and we're never alone. So that explains the name, but let's talk a minute about the purpose of this podcast. And it's pretty straightforward. It's to provide on-demand learning. One of the things that I learned from meeting with the young families of Chapelgate over the first few months was that we're all very busy, and it becomes extremely difficult at times to sort of find a unified time frame that works for a group of us to gather. So some of us have figured out ways to meet for small group, but in terms of like showing up to Sunday school, or perhaps, maybe a Wednesday night gathering. Like those things can be really difficult. You have different nap schedules, different work schedules, and a podcast really provides the opportunity for us to listen and learn at our own pace in our own availability. And so providing that on-demand learning, and we're really hoping to do it by interviewing 3 different types of people: pastors, peers, and predecessors. And, it's cute. It has 3 Ps. It's easy to remember. But here's the idea is there's certain conversations that I get to have in my job here at church because I'm surrounded by pastors like Mike and Jim and Dan, Patrick, Steve, Jeff, all the others. It's like I get to have certain conversations throughout the week that I know for a fact nobody else gets to. They just don't have the time. They're not surrounded by these guys the way that I am. And so it is a real blessing to sort of kind of picking the brains of those guys. And I really did sit down one day and I was like, man, I was telling Kate, my wife, I was like, I get to have these conversations, and I bet you there's so many people in our church that would love to have that conversation that I had an hour ago with Dan. And so I thought, well, let's make that happen. And so we worked on that. And then predecessors are just those folks who've kind of come and gone before us. Maybe they're empty nesters now, or maybe they have kids who are out in college or high school, but they remember what it was like to have a 1-year-old. They remember those sleepless nights. They remember the early years of marriage and how hard it was to learn how to live with another human being and make decisions together and manage money together, and sex and all those things that are complicated and difficult. And so to sort of pick their brain and go like, what did you guys do well? What did you learn? What did you not do well? And what did you learn from that? And how can you help us live out the gospel in our marriage and in our parenting? And so we're going to talk to them. And then the last is peers. And that kind of goes right in line with the title of the show, right? I mean, not only is Jesus with us in our struggle, but we're with each other in the struggle. We were not meant to do this alone. And so the fact is we need one another, and hearing that, maybe there's somebody else who's kind of in the same exact stage as you, who's struggling with the same exact thing as you, and is just kind of making it through the day. It's not a misery loves company. It's a true fellowship of people who are struggling alongside one another, but looking to Jesus as the ultimate hope and comfort. And so we're going to do those things. We're going to hear from pastors, from predecessors and peers, and we're going to cover a lot of topics, but we're going to do it in a very hyper-focused way. This is not a podcast that's supposed to be applicable to people all over the world, or even all over the country, or frankly, all over the state. I mean, Chapelgate, right? That's our home church. We are a regional church. We're located in Howard County, but we draw from Carroll County, Baltimore County, Howard County, maybe even Frederick. But the truth is, like, we're in a highly educated, highly affluent, career-driven area, and there's particular stresses and benefits and culture that comes along with that. And so a lot of the things we're going to talk about, sure, they might transfer well to someone who's living in North Carolina or in Kentucky, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't really hit the young family demographic living in Columbia or Mount Airy, then for us, it's not something that we're going to touch. And that's okay, because this is not a podcast that's meant for the world. It's meant for the young families at Chapelgate Presbyterian Church. And so that's really the purpose of our show is just to provide these on-demand learning opportunities for our young families to see where the gospel impacts their life and drives their decisions and their behaviors. And ultimately, what we're after is heart transformation, right? Because that's the gospel. So let's see what's next on my agenda here. Oh, yeah, a warning. I'll tell you. The whole idea of a podcast sounds so straightforward in my head, and it's kind of like golf or anything else. You watch it on TV and you go, hey, I could do that. And then you go try it and you're like, I can't do that. I'm terrible. You will notice that in this show, and I'm going to take full blame because it's totally me, and I just needed to learn how to figure these things out. Our sound in the first 2 to 3 episodes are a little shaky at best. I've done some work to try to make it manageable, but you'll notice that the sound gets significantly better after episode 2 or 3. I can't remember which one. And so I would just ask you to be patient and gracious towards me. I'm working hard to learn how to do all this stuff. And I know that I definitely did not do it great at times, but I do also want you to know the content is fantastic, especially the interview with Mike Kanjan. I think that's episode 2, where we talk about leaving and cleaving. I mean, just fantastic stuff. And no, the sound quality isn't great, but the content is worth kind of suffering through the lack of crystal clear sound. So, but it does get better, and so there's hope. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, and hopefully you guys are able to stick it out. Oh yeah, so to get the most out of this show, I sat down and I started thinking about, like, it's great to listen to a podcast, but it's kind of like a Sunday school or a small group. If all you do is sort of show up, click play, and then go about your day when it's done, you might get something from it. You might think about it a little bit, but I wanted to give you guys just like two like application-minded ways that we can take this to the next step. And so here they are. Check out the show notes. I've tried to put some resources in at every single show note that you could go learn more about whatever the topic was. Or you could learn more about the person I interviewed or whatever it is. And so check out those show notes. They're going to have some resources for you guys that will be helpful moving forward. And the second thing is this: talk about the episode with your spouse or with your small group. If you're blessed enough to be in a small group, talk about it with them. If you're blessed enough to have a spouse, talk about it with them. If you don't have either of those, find a friend. I mean, these things are always better when you're able to discuss and sort of contemplate and rationalize which parts of this really stood out to you, what made sense, what was difficult, what do you maybe even disagree with about what was said. Like when we take a topic and we internalize it and process it, we get to that place of application that really does, it makes a big difference. So that's kind of all I have here for this sort of bonus episode. I know it was short. It's only like 12 minutes or something, but I wanted you guys to know all these things because it matters moving forward. So thank you for listening. And I hope this first season is as much a blessing to you listening as it was for me to make it. I really do feel like God has blessed me tremendously with the opportunity to pray over you guys and to think about the stage of life that we're all in, and then to go ask questions of wonderful people who have been transformed by the love of Jesus and want to share that with you and with me. And so thank you. And without further ado, let's get rolling with season 1, right? I'm very excited, and I'll catch you guys in episode 1 with Patrick Allen, and it's going to be great. See ya. Hey y'all, thanks for listening to this episode of In the Fire. As always, we would love to get in touch with you. My contact information is below in the show notes if you'd like to reach out. But if you want to learn more about being part of Chapelgate Presbyterian Church or what it means to connect as a young family, I'd encourage you to check out our website, www.chapelgate.org. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.